Это был один из самых громких терактов. Террористы захватили в заложники более 1500 человек, 129 были убиты.
The next chain of events followed. Mikhail Saakashvili's victory in the presidential run in Georgia and the country's swift transformation into a civilized state. Then the Orange Revolution in Kiev in 2004, only aggravating the paranoid ideas of the Russian government that the USSR had lost the Semantic War, an idea that has been cultivated by Kremlin's ideologists. In the depths of the KGB, a theory is being developed that one of the most influential reasons for the demise of the USSR and the Western world's victory was the Semantic War. In their understanding, it was a specially planned, well-thought-through campaign, an operation to infest Soviet minds with Western values. For instance, they were convinced that the bad ideological materials were being spread throughout the Soviet world through Estonia. Only a few dozen kilometers away, on the opposite shore of the Baltic Sea, Finnish TV, also available in Tallinn, was intentionally broadcasting Western music, culinary shows, and erotic movies with scenes of a sweet life. All this diversion was aimed against a country whose shop shelves were barren. In a nutshell, they were convinced that jeans, bubblegum, and magazines were the cause behind the downfall of the USSR.
Они теперь все убеждены, что...
They are all convinced that Soviet Union was destroyed by these imaginary Americans as a result of Semantic War. In short, they stopped believing that we freed ourselves from communism, or that Russians put a full stop in this 70-year-old period and started there for the future. They think it was a loss. However, since there was no military loss in the Cold War, so what are we saying? They once again took this horrid position that there was a semantic conspiration aimed at us. Radio Liberty jeans, lack of ham on the shop shelves, Jesus Christ Superstar, all this, and magazines with musical fashion, and Seven of Garotsov from BBC, and also the concept of democracy and free trade and economic growth. All this was the Semantic War. And now they're saying, let's answer with a semantic revenge to the West. We know how it's done. Because all of them, KGB, foreign intelligence, the main intelligence directorate, and military general staff, all they were studying intensely how in human consciousness links between this good life nowadays and ham and jeans were being destroyed.
I never thought that general Russians would believe the propaganda. You know, maybe at schools when they were young, but the older you were, that you know it just as well. People are not so stupid, but there was so much idealism also, you know, after the Second World War. So the Russians were the victorious side, so everybody was grateful for them, for their for their war efforts and for their victims and for their losses and for millions of people, of course, dying. So that was all. That's why the communists in all these communist states, were not really communists, but they were called like that. They were all believing the ideas for several years at least, you know, but after a few years everybody realized that it's bad.
I feel like a representative of Russia, truly. My mission is to show that there are Russians that can be against Putin, against Crimea annexation, the war, can be cultured, not use swear words, can be calm European people. In that sense, I try to distance myself from Russia, to show that Russia can be different. One cannot generalize and make assumptions about the people, the state, based on some stereotypes, then the worst would be to follow the ideas of some media sources.
Медийных источников.
You know, he doesn't work anymore. No, he doesn't. In a supermarket, a lady at the cash desk will tell you, all you Russians come here, and she looks at you through a prism of all that is happening now in the TV. How Russia makes a pigsty out of everything towards the civilized world. She will project all this onto you. You're safe and cozy here, and every time you have to defend and justify yourself. I'm not that Russian, I'm a different. Who will then answer for those Russians?
Я как раз совершенно понимаю ее и поддерживаю.
No, I actually understand and support her. By default, all Russians are, of course, supporting Putin. It takes many personal gestures, great efforts to come out of this discourse. So, by default, in restaurants, supermarkets, and bars, you are, of course, that persona that is formed by the tourists, television, and newspapers. And we need to accept it and live with it. If you have an opportunity to do so, it's called personal resistance. To make gestures that will make you stand out of this mass. If you have the urgent need, I have this need. I do not want that my friends and acquaintances associate me with 86 or 84% of those who support the current regime. That is why I am not silent. Do not withdraw into my cocoon. I don't argue with anyone, I just make gestures, project, and etc. I actively participate at Czech events to show that a Russian person is not a mass phenomenon, that actually there are individuals that can show that real Russia that is hidden. As for Russia, because I live in Moscow now, and will continue to live there for some time for sure, I can say for sure that I never wanted in my life to leave or move. And we don't have the easiest life, so to build our lives in Moscow and so on. An active person who is looking for opportunities, who is getting a good education, who is moving forward, who is tuned positively with an open mind towards everything new, and with a brain, will live comfortably anywhere. So how wonderful all the changes in our city. For example, in Moscow is an amazing place with huge opportunities, wonderful infrastructure, and honestly, no pressure. I personally don't feel pressure. These are topics I will not even discuss, like Russian politics. What's the point? To discuss what is clear to everybody. It's static, something that doesn't change. It is what it is. I can say one thing. People who want to live normally, work, make money, develop, nothing will get in their way. That's all. Many followers and interested parties noticed that in 2003, Putin had a psychological breakdown. His political speeches began sounding hostile towards the West. Prospects of Cold War were in the air again. One of the ideologists who interpreted this political twist started developing an idea of the dangers of Orange Revolution that would use the technology inspired from within the countries in the post-Soviet space. changes in the regime are being prepared in order to create states hostile to Russia. The NATO countries are doing this on purpose to create a stepping stone for future invasion of Russia. In Russia, all the might behind this propagandistic mechanism is focused on broadcasting this message. This is when a systematic flow of fake news with staged plots, talk shows, movies and series started aiming at deceiving the regular Russian citizen. New concepts appeared such as Russian troll factory and an outburst of hacking attacks on the resources of the opposition. Created by Surkov's pro-Kremlin movement of stormtroopers known as Наши, escalated to real physical threats and dealings with the democratic opposition. The Russian society has very quickly spiraled into a permanent state of aggression towards Western values, with the hope of restoring the Soviet Empire.
I'm trying to find expressions which would be, it's so bizarre, it's not just bizarre, it's perverse. People who represented the worst power structure within the communist society, but it was never a communist society, but we are used to call it communist, but even the totalitarian regimes, so that this guy, and Putin also, he didn't look like a strong character at the time. He was considered to be weak and colorless and no charisma, and he was a guy without a face. Nobody took him seriously. And today he is like a pathological case, someone who can lie openly, who has a poker face. He can manipulate things, even the history. He can manipulate everything, and he has so much power and so much popularity. He's so popular that that's incredible. That's also worrying. So for us, he represents the evil.
То, что происходит с российским обществом,
What is happening with the Russian society is a total devastation, total substitution of concepts or equivocation. And it's not only fake news, it's distortion of information in the news, creation of news reports just partly using facts. It is burying of the facts, but it's much more than just information media. It's advertising, movies, series, children's books.
Фильмы, это сериалы, это детские книги.
I want to say to the people, I feel sorry. You are the victims. One of my good friends stated that the products of the Soviet ideology are scarred and deformed for the rest of their lives. These symptoms cannot be cured. That is why I am so sad that the opportunity of 91 was not used to its potential. And one generation was lost. New generation is born with a clean conscience and untouched, with a belief that everything can be better. Until the civilized world, the Western world, realizes that Russia cannot be segregated by a tall wall so that rockets and missiles don't start flying left and right, there is no solution not to protect yourself from these consequences and symptoms. You need to heal the reason behind the symptoms. We need to help cultivate a new generation of young Russians that cannot compromise themselves, as opposed to politicians who are already in office. And I can't believe that Russia has the democratic potential, even in this harsh climate in Russia. It will not be now, perhaps in 2 or 3 generations, but you need to make a first step towards that direction, not a step back towards idolizing Ivan the Terrible and Stalin, like it's happening now.
Путин нашел нашел язык.
Putin found a language to use with people. He's truly a leader. This is a person who speaks to the people in a language that they want to hear. What is the language? It is the language of a differently perceived word, cheap-jack and trashy language. Evidently a language of these people that I mentioned earlier, guards, personal drivers that keep warm in the cold of the winter, keeping the car engine on. But it's this muzhiki with their rude thinking that from the beginning they're used to serving, and they do not uphold the values of the persona family. For them it's more important to have a strong presence of an owner.
Well, I felt quite differences when I was in Russia in late 90s. First, we were bullied by the police, like regularly, which was not.
You were bullied by Czech police at this time as well.
No, it was completely different, and also, I mean, it was much rougher there, and it still is. And I remember Petra Procházková, who is a Czech journalist who lived in Russia, and she did a great work in covering all the conflicts at Caucasus and all around. She's banned from Russia. She said, just in order to get into work in Moscow, she had to start drinking in the morning, because all your instincts, everything you will learn in the Czech Republic, goes against kicking old women trying to get off the train. But if you didn't do it, you couldn't get in. It was such a mess. And we had the same. I mean, I went to buy my first train ticket, and I was standing there like an idiot for 2 hours or an hour. I couldn't get to the counter because I just couldn't get myself start elbowing the people around, and that's what's slightly different I felt it's slightly different in Russia than it was here, and maybe this roughness and what still I thought was lack of any constraint on the side of the authorities. They were, I mean, you couldn't do anything. You were just powerless. Here you can, argue with police or do something. Not in Russia in that time, and I doubt you can do it this time.
You can't.
But it's the same when you come from. I live in London. Oh, in England. I've been there 2 years now, and you realize that the society or people you meet on the streets are rougher here than they are in England. Like, people are nicer to each other. When you meet in easy, simple things, like when you are getting a basket in a shopping mall, and so you come from England to Prague, but from Prague to Russia it's another 2 steps back. I mean, that was my experience. But I'm saying I haven't been to Russia for 10 years or even more.
But I felt at this time, at the second half of 90s, I felt that it's getting better, that people know about it, that people are trying to do something with that, and that the people who decided to fight it somehow or to work with that, let us say, are not oppressed by anyone, which has rapidly changed. But obviously we are still talking about the time where there was the first Chechen war and the second after that. So everything this, and as you said about Petra Procházková, which is another level than if you come there as a student and run around Moscow. It's definitely something else, and it's in the air. But on the other hand, like going around Moscow, and I remember in a way it was free. I had friends who were rock musicians, and suddenly they could play in some clubs, and everything had somehow Western look in the way how they could behave, how they could act. But at the very same time, their friends were hanging themselves because they would have to go to the army. So it was still there. You are right. But still, something made me believe at this time that it's problem. But the course, the way how it's going, won't change so easily. That it's on its way.
A complex of the fact that we are such a big country and we live worse off than the tiny Czech Republic. These Czechs that have never had any resistance in their lives, we liberated them during the Second World War, and they were sitting there and doing nothing. The Soviet army had to free them, and now they're living a better life than we are. How is it possible? And they're also ungrateful. This very feeling, inferiority complex, ungratefulness, and at the same time this megalomania, such a big country, and everybody just walking over us, how can it be? It all led to the manipulation. You can work very well with it. You do not need to be a psychologist to work with it. You don't respect us. We will force you to. You will see. I will be your leader. If not respect, then they will fear me, at least. Yes, we cannot make a perfect car that drives around. Let's make a missile that everybody will fear. I simplified it now, quite primitive. However, really, President Putin was able to find a path to the soul of a Russian. Maybe he was trained by the KGB, where he studied and worked. And he found, he could explain to the people that it is not important that they live a bad life and not in such a free country like the Western world. It is crucial that he gave them back a feeling of a big nation that everybody is afraid of. We need to understand that in politics, and there is big geopolitical tasks that are being solved by the leaders of each country because it's normal. It's just normal. How to say it? It's a law of nature. Our government, people that don't want to do it, don't go to the government. It is their world. It is their function. Let's note that a regular citizen that doesn't work in politics, for example, I don't, I never will, and I'm not interested. In 2008, Russian leadership demonstrated an act of aggression towards its neighbor Georgia, having influenced the Russian public opinion that they are surrounded by enemies. Russia had falsely accused Georgia of attacking Russian peacekeepers in Trinvali, resulting in the events of 8th of August when the Russian army crossed the Georgian border. The next act of aggression was aimed at Ukraine for its intentions to join the EU. Using the unstable situation in Kiev during Maidan, Crimea was annexed by the Russian Federation. Further steps were then taken by Kremlin, resulting in complete alienation of the regions Luhansk and Donetsk, creating constant military hotspots in these areas, fueling this hybrid war.
I would say we feel it very heavily, and if I should place it in time, I would say, as you said, 10 years ago, exactly. For me, it was in Georgia. 2008. That was for me the turning point.
But anyway, they're coming in Europe, they live here, even they are against Putin. They feel themselves, they are not involved, they are not in charge. I don't think it's correct way, because first you go and talk to your people in Russia. No, we are escaped and we're a little bit make a distance.
Well, you are in safe, you are safer, you know. You are in safety, a relative safety. But considering what's happening, generally Russians are trying to reach back to their positions what used to be before the destruction of Soviet Unions and the separate republic.
Now it works because it's a combination of Soviet and criminal
and nationalism, and I think they are like gangsters. It's a gangsters mentality, which is fantastic. That you would think it would be more sophisticated in a way, but then we find out that the way they talk, you know, the way they organize their things, that they are killing people on streets, you know, they are killing people with Novichok, you know, with the gas, you know, they are killing their agents.
Okay, let's do it like this. Propaganda has both sides. A beautiful story with London. And what happened in London? Well, you remember the wonderful spy story and so on and so on. So really, what happened then? In more details, if you can, please. So you're saying it's a spy story. What are the details? What really happened? Look, the events like this, we, the regular people, will look back at in 50 or even 100 years. Well, now we will never find out about what happened like now. In politics, it's never beneficial for only one side. It is a part of the game.
А как вот ты себя объяснишь, что столько людей?
How would you explain that so many people seem to get along in the 80s, 90s, even noughties? You said you represent Russia in Venetian Biennale. There was a common language, common country, terminology. How do you explain that you now speak different languages? You do not understand each other? It's a good question that comes from a series of what books did you read in childhood? If you had this injection of this sort of freedom and independence, then it lives on in you. If it was just a conjunction, then perhaps... Apparently everybody was reading the very same books. Yes, because you couldn't, as there was no extra choice of anything. It's just that people that think ethics and profession are the most important. Maybe it's important that you deal with art, but there are plenty of people involved in our culture and art that serve the regime. I don't know, I think it's impossible to explain, and the answer is rooted in the family or human qualities or something. You know that there is a big crack spreading across families. Well, that's the thing. It says that there is no answer to this question.
I mean, turning points. I mean, there was Abkhazia, Transnistria, there was Karabakh, there was Yugoslavia. I mean, the Russians were, I mean, everywhere. I mean, I don't buy into that, like, the change came with Putin.
No,
and it has not.
Me neither, and you are very right. And I think, like, yeah, but for me, like, feeling at the West, it was the touching the West. You are right, and it's going farther and farther. But if I should speak from the point from our cozy Central Europe, for me the turning point, and it wasn't like politically, you are very right, it could have, and it has many other flows where it goes and how it works, like with all the, it's not just the Putin, it's the whole structure. But feeling it, from me, it started from Georgia, because in a way it sounds funny if you say Western world, but it was in a way our world that was touched by Russia.